Emily Carter did not plan to cross any lines. She had spent most of her life avoiding them. At 46, Emily lived in a quiet town in Vermont with her husband, Daniel Carter. Their home sat near a small road lined with tall maple trees. In the fall, the leaves turned red and gold, and tourists sometimes stopped to take pictures. It was a kind of peaceful place where nothing dramatic seemed to happen for many years. Emily believed her life was exactly how it was supposed to be. She had married Daniel when she was 24. Back then, he was ambitious, funny, and full of energy. They built their life slowly. Daniel worked hard to grow his career in finance, and Emily followed her passion for art and became a high school art teacher. Their days were busy when their children were young. There were soccer games, school projects, birthday parties, and family vacations that filled the years with noise and laughter. But time moves quietly when people are busy. Before Emily realized it, her children had grown up. Their daughter Hannah was now studying biology at a university in Chicago. Their son Michael had just started college in Boston. The house that once felt full of life now felt large and quiet. Daniel continued working long hours. His job had grown more demanding over the years. Many nights he came home tired, ate dinner quickly, and opened his laptop again to answer emails or prepare for meetings. Sometimes Emily tried to start conversations, but Daniel's mind always seemed somewhere else. It was not that he was a bad husband, he simply lived inside his work. Emily understood that. She had always supported his ambitions. Still, there were evenings when she sat in the living room alone, watching television without really paying attention, and wondered when their conversations had become so short they were not fighting. They were not unhappy, but something between them had become distant and quiet. Emily rarely spoke about it. Instead, she tried to keep herself busy. One morning in early spring, while drinking coffee and scrolling through community events online, she saw a small advertisement for a weekend photography class at the local community center. It was a beginner course designed for people who wanted to learn how to take better photos of landscapes and nature. Emily had always loved art, and photography had interested her for years, though she had never taken it seriously. The class met every Saturday morning for 8 weeks, without thinking too much about it. She signed up the following Saturday. Emily arrived early with a simple digital camera she had bought a few years earlier but rarely used. The classroom was small, with about 10 students sitting around a large table. Some were older retirees, others were younger people looking for creative hobbies. Emily chose a seat near the window and waited quietly for the class to begin. A few minutes later, a man walked in carrying a worn camera bag over his shoulder. He looked younger than most of the people in the room, maybe late 30s. He had dark hair, a relaxed posture, and an easy confidence that made him stand out without trying. He looked around the room, smiled politely at a few people, and took the seat next to Emily. "Hi," he said casually. "Is this the photography class?" Emily nodded and smiled. "Yes, I think we're in the right place." "I'm Ryan," he said, extending his hand. "Emily." His handshake was warm but relaxed, like someone who met new people often. The instructor arrived shortly after and began explaining the basics of camera settings, lighting, and composition. During the class, Ryan occasionally made quiet jokes or comments that made Emily smile. He seemed comfortable talking to everyone, but somehow he spoke to Emily the most. During a short break, Ryan leaned back in his chair and asked, "So what made you join the class?" Emily shrugged lightly. "I guess I just wanted to try something new." "Are you an artist or something?" She laughed softly. "Actually, yes. I teach art at the high school." "That explains it," Ryan said. "Artists usually have a good eye for photos." "What about you?" Emily asked. Ryan tapped his camera bag. "I'm a travel photographer, mostly freelance work. Magazines, websites, tourism projects." Emily raised her eyebrows slightly. "Then why are you in a beginner class?" Ryan smiled. "Because sometimes it's nice to slow down and remember the basics." The conversation was easy. Natural to Emily didn't think much about it at first. They were simply classmates sharing a hobby. But over the next few weeks, they kept ending up next to each other. Sometimes Ryan arrived first and saved the seat beside him. Other times Emily came early and placed her bag there without even realizing she was doing it. The class focused on outdoor photography as the weather warmed one Saturday. The instructor took everyone to a nearby park to practice photographing. Trees, water reflections, and natural light. Ryan walked beside Emily along the trail. "You see that patch of sunlight through the branches?" he said, pointing toward a group of trees. "That's perfect for framing a shot." Emily lifted her camera and tried to capture it. Ryan stepped closer and gently adjusted the angle of her camera. "Try from here," he suggested. For a brief moment, their shoulders almost touched. It was a small thing, but Emily felt strangely aware of it. After the class ended that day, a few people left quickly. But Ryan stayed behind with Emily near the parking lot. "You're getting better already," he said. Emily smiled. "Thanks to your advice." Ryan looked toward the horizon where the sun was beginning to lower. "You know," he said, "there's a lake not far from here. Amazing sunsets. You want to practice photography outside class? It's the best place." Emily hesitated for a second. Her instinct told her to keep things simple. But another part of her, the part that had been bored and lonely for a long time, felt curious. "Maybe sometime," she said. Ryan nodded. Double quotes, no pressure. "Thought you'd like it." They said goodbye and drove home. That evening, Emily cooked dinner while Daniel talked on his phone in the next room about investment reports and client meetings. She tried to focus on preparing the meal, but her mind kept drifting back to the day. Conversation with Ryan. It was strange how easy it had been to talk to him. Daniel finally joined her at the table. "How was your class today?" he asked quickly. "It was good," Emily said. "That's nice." Then his phone buzzed again, and he picked it up. The conversation ended there. Emily didn't feel angry, just quietly disappointed. A week later, Ryan sent her a message through the photography class group chat. "Sunset looks perfect tonight. I'm heading to the lake with my camera if anyone wants to join." Emily stared at the message for a long moment. Her first thought was that she shouldn't go. Her second thought was that it was just photography. After a few minutes, she grabbed her camera keys and left the house. The lake Ryan mentioned was peaceful and almost empty when Emily arrived. The sky was turning soft shades of orange and pink. Ryan stood near the water, adjusting his tripod. He smiled when he saw her. "I'm glad you came." He spent the next hour taking pictures of the sunset. Ryan showed her how to adjust the exposure and focus on reflections in the water. Emily listened carefully, enjoying the quiet moment. At one point, Ryan stepped behind her to guide her camera angle again. His hand briefly touched hers. Emily felt a small spark run through her chest. She ignored it. They continued talking while the sun slowly disappeared behind the trees. Ryan told her about his fees. Ryan told her about his years traveling through Canada and the Pacific Northwest, photographing mountains, forests, and coastal towns. Emily found the stories fascinating. Her life had always been steady and predictable. Hearing about distant places made her feel like she was experiencing them through his words. "What about you?" Ryan asked at one point. "Have you traveled much?" Emily shook her head. "Not really. Mostly family trips when the kids were younger." Ryan looked at her thoughtfully. "You seem like someone who should see more of the world." Emily laughed softly. "Maybe in another life." "Why not this one?" he asked. She didn't answer because the question felt more serious than he probably intended. As the sky darkened, they packed up their cameras and walked slowly toward their cars. Emily realized she hadn't thought about work, responsibilities, or the quiet emptiness of her house for the entire evening. She had simply enjoyed the moment, and that realization made her both happy and uneasy. Over the following weeks, Emily and Ryan continued seeing each other outside class. Sometimes they met for coffee after photography sessions. Other times they explored new places to take pictures. Their conversations grew longer. They talked about childhood memories, favorite music, regrets, and dreams. Ryan had an open way of speaking that made people feel comfortable sharing things. Emily found herself telling him stories she had never told anyone else. She spoke about how strange it felt when her children left for college. She admitted that sometimes she didn't know what her purpose was anymore. Ryan listened carefully. "You're still figuring things out," he said one afternoon. "Maybe." Emily replied, "I think you've just spent so many years taking care of everyone else that you forgot about yourself." His words stayed with her long after that conversation ended. One evening, they walked along a quiet trail near the lake while the sun lowered through the trees. The air was warm and calm. Ryan stopped walking and looked at her. "You know something?" he said. "What?" "You act like your best years are already behind you." Emily frowned slightly. "I don't think that's true." "Then why do you talk like your life is already finished?" She didn't know how to answer. Ryan smiled gently. "From where I'm standing, Emily, you're just getting started." Emily Carter knew she had crossed an invisible boundary with Ryan Miller, but she couldn't stop thinking about him. The feeling that had started as a spark had grown into something undeniable, something she both feared and craved. Each day that passed made the silence in her home feel heavier, louder, and more suffocating. Daniel was still present, still kind, still her husband in every obvious way. But his absence in the emotional spaces she needed made her more aware of Ryan's presence in her life. She felt alive in ways she hadn't felt for years, and the guilt of it gnawed at her even as she craved it. It happened slowly at first, like water filling a quiet pond. After that first sunset, Emily and Ryan began spending more time together. The photography sessions became excuses to meet in cafes, parks, and empty streets, sometimes under the pretense of discussing new techniques or reviewing photos. Ryan would always find ways to make her feel seen, to make her laugh, to make her feel that the world still had corners meant just for her. Emily would go home at night with a racing heart, knowing Daniel was upstairs working or asleep, completely unaware of the storm quietly brewing in his house. One rainy afternoon, Ryan suggested they visit a small-town festival a few towns over. Emily hesitated, reminding herself she was married and that this was risky. Ryan smiled and gently said, "You don't have to think about it as crossing a line. Think of it as two friends exploring a moment together." She wanted to believe that, and she almost did. The festival was lively, filled with colorful stalls, music, and the smell of fried food. They walked side by side, sometimes brushing hands, sometimes talking about the mundane things that became suddenly interesting because they were shared with someone who listened. Later that evening, Emily noticed the way Ryan looked at her. There was a softness, a hunger, and a curiosity in his gaze that made her stomach tighten. She caught herself staring back, wondering how she had ended up here, feeling something so strongly for a man who wasn't hers. They found themselves sitting on a bench near a fountain, rain dripping from their jackets, the sound of music and laughter blending with the soft tap of rain. Ryan reached out to brush a wet strand of hair from her face. And for a moment, Emily felt as if the rest of the world didn't exist. She wanted to pull back to remember the life she had and the promises she had made. But she didn't. She let him be close, and she felt a thrill she hadn't felt in decades. That night, she went home exhausted, but not from the festival. She lay in bed next to Daniel, who was already asleep, and felt a quiet desperation. How could she feel this way? How could she want someone who wasn't hers? Emily told herself she was imagining things, think her mind was playing tricks on her, but deep down, she knew it wasn't imagination. It was reality, messy and intense. She couldn't ignore it anymore. In the following weeks, the tension between Emily and Ryan became more palpable. Their conversations grew deeper, more personal, and sometimes lingered into the night over texts and calls. They shared dreams, regrets, and longings in ways Emily hadn't shared with Daniel in years. Daniel remained unaware, buried in his work, occasionally asking simple questions like, "How's your day?" Or, "Did you finish grading those papers?" Emily answered politely, hiding the storm that raged within her. One evening, Ryan suggested they take a weekend trip to the coast. Emily hesitated, thinking of her obligations and the potential consequences. But the longing she felt was stronger than the caution in her mind. It's just a small trip, Ryan said softly. No one has to know. It's just two friends enjoying a weekend. Emily agreed, telling herself it was innocent, though every nerve in her body knew it wasn't. The weekend was magical. They walked along the beach, took photos of the waves, and watched sunsets that painted the sky in deep purples and golds. They laughed, shared quiet conversations, and for brief moments, it felt like the world had shrunk to only the two of them. Emily felt alive, wanted, and understood in ways that had been missing for years. Every touch, every look, every laugh between them seemed to pull her deeper into something she couldn't escape. One night, sitting on a quiet pier, Ryan reached out and held her hand. It was an innocent gesture on the surface, but it sent a jolt through Emily that she couldn't ignore. He turned to her, his voice low and serious. Emily, I know this is complicated, but I can't hide how I feel. She looked at him, heart pounding, aware of the enormity of the moment. I feel the same, she whispered, though the words felt both thrilling and terrifying. She had admitted it now, aloud, and there was no taking it back. Returning home from the trip was the hardest part. Emily's mind buzzed with emotions, guilt, desire, and fear. She carried herself through the house as if nothing had changed, but the walls seemed smaller, the silence heavier. Daniel never asked, never noticed. Emily wondered if he could sense the shift in her, though she knew he was too focused on his work to care. The days following the trip were filled with tension. Emily and Ryan continued to meet, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for walks, sometimes for photography sessions that lasted hours. Each meeting, each touch, each look made the line between friendship and something more blur further. Emily felt trapped between two worlds: the secure, breezy, predictable life with Daniel and the intense, electrifying connection with Ryan. One afternoon, Emily arrived at Ryan's studio. He had a small workspace filled with cameras, lenses, and photographs of distant places. Ryan looked at her, smiling but serious. We can't keep doing this forever, he said quietly. Emily nodded, though she felt a pang in her chest. She knew he was right. The emotional intimacy they shared was dangerous, and yet she couldn't stop herself. I know, she whispered, but I can't help how I feel. Ryan stepped closer, his hand brushing hers. I don't want to hurt you, he said, but I also can't pretend this isn't happening. Emily closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the moment. She had crossed the line emotionally, and now she was facing the reality of it. She wasn't just curious anymore. She was deeply involved, and there was no turning back. That night, Emily lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling. Daniel was beside her, asleep, unaware of the storm within her. Every memory of Ryan, every touch, every word replayed in her mind. She whispered to herself, I've gone too far. Days turned into weeks, and the tension grew unbearable. Emily realized she had to make a choice. She could either pull back, preserve her marriage, and risk never feeling alive again, or continue with Ryan, risking everything she had built over 22 years. Every fiber of her being wanted to stay with Ryan. But the thought of betraying Daniel, whom she still cared for, filled her with guilt. Finally, Emily decided she had to confront the truth. She needed clarity, even if it hurt. One evening, she met Ryan at the lake where it had all begun. The air was crisp, and the water reflected the fiery sunset. She looked at him, eyes steady, voice trembling slightly. Ryan, I need to think about us. I can't keep going like this without knowing what it means. Ryan nodded, understanding but visibly disappointed. I know, he said. I just want you to be honest with yourself and with me. Emily took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. She realized that the line she had crossed was not just emotional, but had the potential to destroy lives. She had felt alive with Ryan, yes, but that thrill came with consequences. She needed to decide what she valued most: the safe, quiet life she had with Daniel, or the unpredictable, passionate connection with Ryan. The decision wasn't simple. She walked home that night with her thoughts swirling, heart heavy, mind racing. She knew that either choice would leave scars, emotional, psychological, and perhaps irreversible. She had crossed the line, and now she had to face the consequences of her desires, her actions, and her heart. Over the next few days, Emily reflected on her life, her marriage, and her longing. She realized that while Ryan had awakened feelings she hadn't known she was missing, Daniel represented stability, shared history, and a love that had endured decades. She couldn't ignore the years they had built together, the sacrifices they had made, and the quiet love that still existed between them. Finally, Emily made a choice. She reached out to Ryan, explaining that while her feelings were real and intense, she could not betray her marriage. She needed to step back, not out of lack of feeling, but out of responsibility. Ryan accepted it, though the pain was evident. They agreed to limit contact and focus on their own lives. Emily returned to her home with a sense of relief mixed with lingering longing. She knew the emotional journey with Ryan would always be a part of her story, a reminder of what it felt like to be deeply desired and fully seen. But she also recognized the importance of boundaries, commitment, and the life she had promised to protect. In the quiet of her living room, Emily sat with a cup of tea, looking out at the autumn leaves, and understood that life was rarely simple. Desire, love, and responsibility often collided. But she also realized that clarity and choice, even when painful, were the only ways to find peace. Emily had crossed the line, yes, but she had learned something invaluable. Understanding one's heart, acknowledging desires, and taking responsibility for actions were the only ways to navigate life's complex emotional landscape.